Okay, there we go. Welcome to the CineECG seminar. A warm welcome to you all. As organized, we are very grateful with the numbers of attendants, and we hope you will find the next hour a worthwhile investment of your time. My name is Hans Slijp, and I'm the CEO of ECG-Excellence, one of the companies behind CineECG. And in the next hour, we will introduce you to a new approach towards 12-lead ECG interpretation. And to do this, we have found great speakers to introduce you to this wonderful world of non-invasive cardiac diagnostics. At the end of the webinar, we will provide you with the option to have an interactive session with the presenters. But if you cannot wait, please use the chat function to drop your questions and remarks at your convenience. Again, we want to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and you will be able to have access to the video later on. As stated, this webinar and CineECG is all about 12-lead ECG interpretation, which is 100 years after its introduction still quite a challenge, even for experts. Last week, Saturday, a LinkedIn post showed small ECG interpretation quiz and 10 true experts responded. And there is really a challenge, as you can see at the results. So, before we move on to our presenters, I want to give you a quick introduction to our company, ECG-Excellence. Our origin lies with another Dutch company called PEAKS, and the founders of PEAKS and ECG-Excellence have a background in inverse cardiac modeling. And following a mission to change the landscape of non-invasive cardiac diagnostics, we firmly believe our technology must be rooted in science. And we are proud to follow the footsteps of Willem Einthoven, a professor who invented this cardiograph 100 years ago. ECG-Excellence actually started 4 years ago as a concept, and CineECG is our first diagnostic product. In the next section, for this webinar, we'll have 3 speakers lined up. First, it will be Professor Fabio Badolini. Professor Badolini has been an expert in ECG interpretation for decades. And besides running AMPS and Cardiocalm, he is also the director of the physiologic research at the University of California. And through the description of current services of AMPS, Professor Badolini will show the current state of remote ECG interpretation and analysis. And the next speaker will be Dr. Pieter van Dam. Pieter is both founder of PEAKS and ECG-Excellence, and he enjoys collaborations with a range of experts across the globe. And besides his extensive activities in our research and product development, Pieter will provide us with more information on the concept and the science behind CineECG. Finally, Dr. Emanuela Locati will take a deeper dive in the clinical results which are already achieved with CineECG. And after these 3 speakers, I will return to introduce CineECG as a new service for the cardiovascular domain. After which the microphones will be unmuted and we can start the interactive part of this webinar. So I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Badolini to give us his presentation.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Thank you very much. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I will not take too much time because, of course, today the focus is the introduction of this CineECG technology. So my 10 minutes talk will simply focus on what is the hosting platform and the partnership that led to this collaboration. This is a product developed by my company, actually the very first product developed by my company, which is called CineECG. So it's purely a coincidence that CineECG and CineECG kind of look similar, of course, or sound similar. Of course, it is a totally different background, and ECG comes really from caliper, and it is really our own framework for the resting ECG analysis. The history, very brief history of CineECG is that it has been about 20 years ago that we launched it initially as a non-screen caliper solution. The Cal stands for caliper, focused and particularly designed for the pharma industry, and more specifically to the drug-induced QT prolongation paradigm, which back in those days was still done on paper or on some sort of ancient techniques of measuring. So we jump into this market with this product, which initially was simply a tool to measure the QT interval to simplify. But it came from the very early days with a comprehensive program interface in order to be integrated and to be externally configured. Our customers were mainly the pharma entities, the CROs, so there was a requirement that this CineECG could be easily integrated into larger architecture. So it came, as I said, from the very beginning with a thorough program interface. But very soon we also added some algorithm and embedded some algorithm capabilities. It is a measuring algorithm, so it is not a diagnostic algorithm, as I explained, which is called Bravo, that is soon integrated into CineECG that allow the making of all these measurements, not only QT, to be done in a semi-automated or in a fully automated fashion. This includes both standard measurements, all intervals and amplitudes that you can possibly measure on an EKG, but also, as we call them, so specialized measurement, which includes morphological index, INFAT scores, you name it. We really try to be comprehensive on whatever can be really measured. Also, importantly, especially for the context today, is this interface and this, let's say, framework is very open, and it allows the linkage to external algorithms, whether they are diagnostic or other. Lately, this is a very short summary of a 20-year history. The challenge in the last few years was to move from a sort of a standalone, despite the API kind of framework, to the remotization of this CineECG through web services, remote apps, and other possibility to make it a remote. In a nutshell, very briefly, a couple of screenshots. CineECG can make, these are some basic interval measurements that you can do on a standard lead, on a rhythm lead, from using this embedded Bravo algorithm, and with the eventual inclusion of some diagnostic statement, in this case coming from the Glasgow algorithm, which is coming from an external linkage library. So it is possible to combine measurement and diagnostic interpretations. It can make all these measurements also on the so-called median beats or representative beats, as it is typically done within 10 seconds or a resting ECG context. But as I said, with some specialized measurements, which I'm not going to list today because it is not the goal, but in addition to the intervals, there are indexes of energy, of symmetry, of the T wave, or other portion of the EKG. As an interoperability, the challenge for this platform was extremely, we are not hardware producers. So for us, it is important that this platform works well with any possible type of ECG format or ECG standard. And that is why CineECG comes with an input sequence of series of format, let me call that, can be added, and it is not even the exhaustive list here, but there are of course all the standard format of EKG that can be seamlessly input into CineECG, but also the output. So it can be actually used as a converter, as a black box from one format to another. We really try to cover and to keep up with all the advances in the industry with respect to ECG formats. As I said, there is an embedded algorithm which is extremely configurable. The user, whether it is a human interacting with CineECG or a process, can configure which type of measurements, again, time or amplitudes can be measured and which, when, where, on which lead, as well as a number of additional options. The dashboard of the algorithm is pretty complex, but try really to cover all the possible facets of ECG analysis that we learned during these 20 years of experience. At the end of the day, the architecture is then pretty simple. There is on the input side ECG data, whether it is waveform or also annotations, just to say that we can also import measurements or metrics that have been already computed by an external algorithm. For example, reading files from an EKG machine that has already generated measurement or diagnostic statement. So we can load the so-called raw data and or annotations that are available in the input file. And then we input through this configuration program interface a bunch of parameters that can be used, and we generate some outputs, which are either, again, ECG information or PDF report, or a combination of the two, or can be complicated, let's say, matrices where we have measured some of those specialized parameters that can be configured, again, on an ad hoc, on a per study basis. And last but not least, there is the possibility to also attach to interface with external libraries, which can be diagnostic algorithms. We have a few, which can be, for example, for those of you in the pharma domain that already know it well, the library from the FDA to make QT measurements. But last but not least, it can be CineECG. So this approach with ECG-Excellence was pretty straightforward from a technical standpoint, because at the end of the day, it consisted to add an external library to the CineECG platform and to have a product that we can present today. Before to conclude, the CineECG can be a standalone user interface tool where the user can visualize the measurements that have been performed and eventually modify them, adjudicate the intervals, and override some of the measurement. But it can be totally in the cloud, as just to use the terminology that everybody uses nowadays. In other words, it can happen in your laptop, it can happen within a LAN network, but it can happen totally in the cloud. And this input and output can be automatically generated using a cloud service like approach. Just a quick press review. This is a tool that has been existing since 20 years, as I said. So there is a rich literature that has used this platform. Probably the most important paper to remind here is when we had the opportunity to compare through the ISCI organization 7 measuring algorithms, and one of them was Bravo from CineECG, but the other 6 were the standard industry: GE, Glasgow, the Means algorithm, Mortara, Philips, and Schiller. And so in that paper published in 2018, basically we were able to compare indirectly. The goal of the paper was maybe not directly this one, but it was a good opportunity for us to put ourselves, at least with respect to this basic measurement, in a blinded fashion, of course, against the so-called standard. But there are a number of other papers, again, starting in the early 2000s when we released this product, that of course in the early days were focusing on the QT interval, but that later also were applied in other contexts, either by our own customers, in this case the group from India, or directly from our group. It has been used in an area totally different than the pharma industry, and this is an example from the Duke group on ischemic preconditioning. It has been used to assess sex hormone impact, again on the QT interval, but also on other intervals. It has been used to assess other parameters as it measured, like the QRS interval in this case, from a group from Dr. Mason, and the JT-peak saga, as we call it in pharma, a few years ago, all turned around the JT-peak interval, and so we of course published some material on that. But also, this is another example and a very large cohort in Italy, similar to the Framingham in some sense, where we could publish a number of publications addressing different aspects again of the resting EKG. Just to come to the very last, in the very last days, it has also been used. This is the very last publication to assess automatically ECG in the Brugada syndrome context. There's about 50 peer-reviewed publications that we can reference. So that's really was my quick introduction, and we are very happy and proud to welcome CineECG in the family of algorithms that can be hosted within this platform. And of course, we are very excited of this venture with ECG-Excellence. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. It was a nice introduction. I would like to ask Peter then to unmute and take over.
Thank you, Hans. Thank you, Fabio. Then I will give a brief introduction to CineECG, some of the background, some of the methods. Diagnosis derived from the standard ECG, just like quickly already shown by Fabio, is proven technology. It's a fundamental diagnostic tool in the clinical practice. It's rapid, it's non-invasive. The rhythm-related diagnostic accuracy is really high. CalECG, caliper, that's time intervals. But waveform analysis is still challenging. It requires substantial training and clinical expertise to do that. There's still limited link to the cardiac anatomy, so it's indirect, not a direct link. And small amplitude signals can be easily missed on this millimeter paper with standard speed and amplification. So what is then the problem that CineECG addresses? It supports the quantitative anatomical visualization of the 12-lead ECG waveform to increase the diagnostic value. That's the aim. So what I want to present here is first the 3D anatomical aspects of the ECG, because mostly people look at it just in waveforms, but there is a 3D aspect of it to it, of course. Also introduce the cardiac anatomy, because most people are used to look at ECG signals, but to combine the two, you need some extra information. Then I will introduce the CineECG method and show what the normal CineECG looks like. So the electrocardiogram waveforms are interpreted by the 3D electrode view. And an electrode is a kind of camera, let's say, on the heart. So V1 looks more on the right, V6 looks more from the apical inferior posterior wall. With that in mind, also proximal activation is contributing in a large extent to the signal amplitude under the electrode, whereas if you look from the side and the waveform front is perpendicular to your ECG, you don't see anything. This makes the camera working and signal analysis very difficult to relate that to the anatomy. And so consequently, the ECG waveforms are determined by spatial summation of multiple waveforms, fronts traveling through the heart, and they cancel each other out partially, or they amplify each other. So these waveforms are very difficult to interpret and relate that to the cardiac anatomy. So to step first to the cardiac anatomy, the heart is a 3D structure, which makes it difficult to interpret it on a 2D screen or on paper. So that's why I want to introduce a few different cross sections. This is a heart in AP view. Here, this is the septum with these yellow dots. This is in the same kind of AP view, but now you cut off the right chamber and a part of the septum, and then you see only the LV. This is cutting it in a 4-chamber fashion, still in AP view, and this is the lateral wall, LV wall, again in AP view. Not easy to combine those. Therefore, we created 3 standard 2D cardiac views based on 3 cardiac axes. First, the axis is right to left. Then we have a posterior anterior axis, the green one, and then we have a superior axis from apex to base. This is how we define the cardiac anatomy. And then these are the views. So we have a 4-chamber view with an RV on the left and an LV on the right. An RAO, right anterior oblique view, with the RV towards you and the LV on the posterior side and the RVOT on top. And then left anterior view, so you look from apex to base, basically RV, LV, and RVOT. With the respective axis every time mentioned beside and underneath. The CineECG relies basically on the vectorcardiogram. And the vectorcardiogram is a vector that represents the average 3D direction and amplitude summed of the summed electrical activity within the heart over time. The limitations of the VCG is that it's traditionally shown in body surface coordinates, like shown here. So this blue line is the vector loop, and the mean axis, let's say, is the red arrow. But it doesn't relate directly to the heart. So if you now rotate this vectorcardiogram into heart space with the 4-chamber RAO and LAO view, then you see here now the vector loop going mostly left, but this blue part, that's the T wave, and the morphology of that is almost invisible, which still has the same problems as what you had with the ECG. Amplitude differences make the VCG very difficult to interpret for a lot of patients. So within the CineECG, we compute another version of the VCG. We just take the ECG and relative and the lead field matrix, basically the position of where we think the electricity at that moment within the heart is, to the electrodes, and we multiply that times the ECG amplitude, and we sum that, and then we have an average direction of the VCG. The advantage of that is if you move your electrode, and we know that, then it's also adapting to that new. So the star here is the position of CineECG. Where is the heart electrically active, more or less? And the red one are the round ones are the electrodes. Then we start to iteratively compute the CineECG, given a fixed velocity. We anchor it in the middle of the QRS. So we say the middle of the QRS is located in the center of mass of the ventricles, assuming that at the middle of the QRS, half of the tissue is active, and then you should be in the center of mass. There we just go iteratively forward and backward, taking the previous position into account, and then go with this constant velocity in the direction that VCG indicates for that time moment. So we go backward towards the beginning of the ECG of the QRS and forward to the end of the QRS and T wave. So we start here in the star, the VCG points in a certain direction, then the CineECG moves with this constant velocity to the next position, then we compute another VCG, and then not going the whole way, but just with the constant velocity to the next star, etc., etc., etc. And with that, we have a kind of position of the electrical activity within the heart. This has been published already with these publications listed below. So to give a very quick workflow overview, we take this 12-lead ECG. This ECG we convert into our VCG, as you saw here before. And from that, we compute then the CineECG. And here you see the typical normal CineECG. It first goes transseptal. It starts here in white, from left to right ventricle, and then moves back to the left ventricle, because this is where the most mass is. And then finally, you go towards the apex, which is the T wave. And this is remarkably consistent with a normal ECG. So far we have now the three cardiac planes, 4-chamber RAO, LAO, but we also can plot this on the cardiac axis. So what's the position on the right to left axis here on top? So it first moves to the right, then it moves to the left, and then the T wave. So the red line is the end of the QRS. Then it moves as T segment somewhat to the right again. And then the blue line is the peak T wave. And then the last part of the T wave moves again somewhat to the left. And then the other axis is, of course, apex base. The QRS moves first to the apex, then moves back to the base, and then the T wave moves towards the apex again. And then the last axis is the posterior anterior axis, and you can see that stays relatively close to the center. What is now a normal CineECG? What is a normal ECG? So for that, we took the PTB Excel database. There are many normal ECGs, but we only took the ones where the age and the gender was listed. So we had 6,515 ECGs. And for every of these ECGs, we constructed the CineECG for the QRS-T sequence. And with that, then we get spatial distribution over the planes. And then what you see here is that the QRS-T direction is towards the left. This is basically the angle we found. It's on the REO plane, it can be basically everywhere. And here in the LAO plane, you see that it's also only moving to the left. This is the normal activation. Most remarkably, it's really the end of the T wave, so T peak, T end. Then you see that really the T wave moves in 90% of the T waves move towards the apex of this smart model. So a very narrow distribution, and this was irrespective of age and gender. So they were very consistent. And here you can see for the different age groups, we had 6 age groups ranging from 18 till 20, 30, 50, 40, 50, 60, and 70 and up. And red is female and blue male. They're very similar all throughout groups. And with that, you can basically get a distribution of what is normal position of the CineECG, so a kind of standardization. So here's the 12-lead ECG of CineECG. This is the electrical pathway on the axis with all these orange lines telling this is normal or this is the 90% range. So if the green line is now within this 90% range, we say this falls within the normal range. So this CineECG shown here on the cardiac axis view is the same as this one on the axis view. And this is then the normal distribution. Just to enlarge it again, these orange lines are the normal distribution between 5 and 90%, and the green line is this patient-specific one. So what can CineECG do with this normal range? Well, one of the things is you can at least tell, is this patient in a normal range or not? So this is what we have added to the CineECG report. It's completely green if the whole CineECG is within this normal range. So is this normal? At least it's within the normal range. And if things are getting outside the normal range, as you can see here, the QRS is somewhat in the normal range, but the T wave, the final part of the CineECG, definitely is not. You can see that also on the axis view, but it's very clearly seen in this axis view. And so this is not a normal one. Please contact a cardiologist. So what does CineECG then add? Well, first of all, it adds a direct anatomical view on the standard 12-lead ECG. I don't know of any other technology that's able to do it in this way, and it's instantaneous. Based on the comparison we did with the normal values for QRS, ST, and T wave derived from the public ECG database, can say basically what is normal and what is not normal. So to say what is normal and what's not normal, we don't need an expert at that moment. We just say, this is a red one, this is off, please maybe contact an expert. But if everything is within the green, and then you could already say, this is most likely a normal ECG, no complaints, there's nothing wrong. With that, I want to finalize with the last sentence. It's our ambition really and passion to save lives through enhanced ECG technology, because there's really way more to see in the ECG. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And let's not waste time and take a deeper dive into what's, well, achievable with using CineECG. So I will ask Emanuela Locati to take over the screen and share your presentation. Who does? If you unmute.
Okay, I'm mute and my camera. Okay, nice to see you all. I thank you, the previous speaker, Fabio, Peter, for the very good introduction, which made my life easier, for sure. And now I hope I will be able to share the screen. Why not? Okay. Next, this. Okay. So my task today is to talk about clinical applications of CineECG. It was a very, very nice cooperation with Peter, with Hans. So we imagine a very nice scenario for CineECG in the future. Of course, we can apply the technology you just heard about to several conditions such as conduction disorders, delayed depolarization or early repolarization syndromes. In fact, our experience started with the Brugada syndrome, but probably we can apply this with success to long QT syndrome, to coronary artery disease, and to several congenital or acquired cardiomyopathies. For as a start, I will show you where we really started. That was the idea of to improve the understanding of the EKG in the Brugada syndrome. Everybody knows that in Brugada, the EKG pictures is quite confused because there are several, either very typical pattern, I would call it like shark fin-like EKG, of the spontaneous type 1, but also sometimes it is hidden within very subtle abnormalities which can be taken as normals. And this is the case of type 2 and type 3 Brugada pattern. The diagnostic procedure to undetect the abnormality is to perform an invasive test with sodium blocking drugs, which is ajmalin, which require hospitalization, and there is also a certain degree of risk. And you can see that even a normal EKG under the stress of ajmalin can in fact demonstrate a very clear Brugada type 1 pattern, which is practically identical to the spontaneous pattern. This condition is quite worrisome due to the fact that it can lead to sudden death due to malignant ventricular arrhythmias, ventricular fibrillation.
Your presentation is not viewable anymore.
Okay. Hello?
Emanuela, can you please put the presentation back on, because apparently something went off screen.
Okay. We'll go to the next slide.
From where? From what point did you?
I think Fabio is now sharing his screen.
Okay, I start again.
Yes.
But for me, it's still, it is still my. Okay, I'll do it again. Do you see me?
Yes, there you are.
Where did you miss me? Where?
On this page, to this goes.
This page. Okay. So as I said several times, a normal tracing can in fact hide a very ominous condition such as a Brugada, because even from nearly normal EKG, you can have still the condition can be there and be elicited by an ajmalin test. And as I say, this can be a very dangerous condition leading to ventricular fibrillation. We have several studies now proving that this condition is due to abnormal electrical activity on the epicardial side of the RVOT, the right ventricular outflow tract. corresponding to the area explored by the high right and left precordial leads, such as those shown in this specific modified EKG. And this corresponds to this area of inhomogeneous electrical activity. And this area of electrical activity can be ablated by radio frequency application. And this already demonstrated to be very safe and very efficacious to prevent the occurrence of ventricular arrhythmias in this subject. And from this, with this understanding of the Brugada condition, we initially applied CineECG to the 12-lead EKG tracing, and we were able to undetect something that was came actually as a surprise to us, because at a very evident difference with the normal controls, who shows the electrical wavefront moving from the apex from the base to the apex of the heart towards the left ventricle. In Brugada, in spontaneous Brugada type 1, the terminal components of the electrical activity indicated in blue indeed tend to go towards the right ventricle, and towards the RVOT, exactly as you would expect from the theory and from the electrophysiological studies. So we were able to find a correlation between the electrocardiographic tracing and what you expect on the basis of the etiopathogenesis of this disease. And beside, this kind of behavior was never observed not only in normal subject, but also in patients with the right bundle branch block, in whom the activity was truly mainly directly to the right ventricle, but never towards the right ventricle outflow tract, as in Brugada syndrome. And we were also able to demonstrate that this behavior was present in patients who developed Ajmalin-induced BRS pattern even before the Ajmalin induction. So the possibility, so the tendency, I mean, the direction of the depolarization towards the right ventricle outflow tract and the right aspect of the right ventricle was already present even before Ajmalin infusion, a pattern that was never observed in patients who were negative during Ajmalin infusion. So this is quite interesting and quite important, because that would be a possibility to undetect cases even before, or undetect suspicious cases even before Ajmalin infusion. And then we were also able to correlate the direction of the terminal components of the QRS with the location of the arrhythmogenic substrate, as shown by the epicardial mapping in these patients. Besides, we were also able to show what happened to the EKG after the arrhythmogenic substrate ablation in Brugada patient. So while in patient at the baseline, it was evident that the terminal components were mainly directed towards the right ventricle wall, anterior wall, and right RVOT, at the difference with the T wave, which was mainly directed towards the apex of the left ventricle, as in normal subject. Early and late after ablation, this behavior disappeared. So the terminal component was directly towards the apex of the ventricles, exactly as in normal control. And so the patients after ablation, in a late follow-up after ablation, became really normal. So they didn't show anymore any abnormality. These were patients with spontaneous Brugada pattern that fully normalized after ablation. And so instead, the other, as I was saying, what happened in patients with bundle branch blocks? That is another application of this technology. What we expect in patients with conduction delay due to bundle branch block is that the area, in fact, activated, but each specific bundle activate later. So in left bundle branch block, the terminal QRS should be directed to the left base, while in right bundle branch block, the terminal should be directed to the right base. And this is the hypothesis where we started from. And this is what, in fact, we observed in a patient with left bundle branch block. On the right panel, you see the distribution of the normal, the 6,000 normal subject, as was already explained to you by Peter before. And this was the behavior of the depolarization and repolarization in a patient with left bundle branch block. As you see, the direction of the wavefront was evidently pointing towards the left at a much greater extent than in normal subject and towards the superiors, while in the anterior posterior plane it was similar to what happened in the normal subject. So it is a very evident, doesn't require any further, if you want, pattern recognition. You really simply see that this patient has an activity definitely pointing towards the left, side of the heart according to the Cartesian axis. You can see here, while in the right bundle branch block, it is practically the opposite. So compared to the normal distribution, the activity is much directed at a much larger extent since the very beginning towards the right rather than to the left, while in the superior and anterior view you see different differences that are mainly located in the terminal components towards the end of the repolarization. So it is much more intuitive that you define clearly something wrong in the right ventricle rather than in the left ventricle. So when we use this kind of classification, we could show that the CineECG provided an automatic and easily quantitative differentiation between conduction defect, also including incomplete right bundle branch block, which is a very difficult task because it is a condition which is really in the middle between complete right bundle branch block and normal subject. And the terminal QRS direction and localization obtained by CineECG proved to be simple and accurate and a robust method. So the last, if you want, frontier of this possibility is to detect abnormality in acute cardiac ischemia. These are really preliminary data, but just to show you that in a case, for example, of the occlusion of the distal right coronary artery, again, we were able to show abnormality of the wavefront, the EKG wavefront, pointing towards the left and to the RVOT. So the territory that might be impaired in this case is probably this depicted by this kind of abnormality. So the right area is no longer active. It is predominantly, the electrical activity is predominantly directed towards the left, as if this area was silent. And for example, this is a case of occlusion of the proximal left anterior descending. And this indicates a behavior similar to what you would expect in the left bundle branch block conduction disorder. So in conclusion, CineECG provides depiction of feasible and pragmatic method to relate the EKG waveform to the cardiac anatomy. It is derived by computation from the regular standard EKG. Utilizing an existing clinical technology and workflow. So it doesn't change the normal practice. It's only an addition to the interpretation of the 12-lead EKG. Can be used in different conduction disorders for the interpretation of the Brugada patterns and probably for several other disease conditions such as long QT syndrome and coronary artery disease. We have still a lot of work to do to improve the patient-specific modeling of the heart to really improve the attribution of the electrical waveform to the regional components of the, to the mechanical and regional component of the ventricles. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, Dr. Locati. And Okay, I'll ask my technical guy to put my presentation back on. Martin?
Yes, I will.
Okay. Okay. Right.
You would part 2, I guess. I'm searching.
We'll get there. So here we are. Thank you. So as promised, we will now move to the interactive part of our presentation of the webinar. But first, we want to introduce the operational side of CineECG, as we now have been familiar with the technology.
I don't see anything moving. So
sorry?
I still see welcome to the CineECG webinar.
Okay. I don't see that.
Now it's gone.
Yeah. Martin, I'm still asking if you could present.
I'm searching for it. Little trouble, sorry.
Okay, just put on the same presentation then as the first one. Okay. Is this now visible? Okay.
And then go through the next slide because it's still, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Is this visible now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the challenge is now to make CineECG available to a lot of more people who want to use it and get benefit out of it, because I think that's the part. And to do that, we have created 2 content-rich community sites which support the users of CineECG. So we have CineECG.com, which is brought to life today, actually, and HealthCore, which is the other part, and they are complementary website, and I will give a more introduction to each of them. This is your option to get familiar with CineECG. On CineECG.com, this is what we call the community site, which supports you and the users. And we do this by tutorials, FAQs, R&D information, case reports, a newsletter, and we have a support function. But it also provides access to our other website. And for the first offers, we offer people the option to have free trials. So everybody gets 10 ECG reports, cases, if you can, so you can start getting acquainted with this. Because the other website is, you can go to the portal and then you end up with the HealthCore website. And this is where actually the whole thing really happens, what we call the execution. So it's user registration, we have billing options, there's an upload and a download of the report. You can view the data and you can view the report, and it's all available on this platform. So the way it works, actually, it's very simple. You upload your 12-lead ECG data in a digital format. We use the Bravo algorithm, which Professor Baldellini explained. Then we use the median beat, and then we run the CineECG analysis. And what it materializes in is actually in a couple of seconds you get a 3-page report where we first have the classical view, and then we move to the CineECG part, and you get the data and the analysis we just showed you in the other presentation. So this is the median beat. This is where the recorded data is compared with the normals. And there we have also, well, percentages of how it levels with the normals. And in the second page, third page, we have this traffic light system where we show whether or not amber, green or red in confronting it. And then we have the electrical pathway in its speed. So this is available as of end of next week, this part of our service. And if people are interested, please leave a note and then we will get you informed that this is going live as well. So the first part, the community side, is already live, so you can start learning. Which brings us to the interactive part, and we've got a couple of minutes left. So if we can unmute you all, if there are questions, either present them via the chat or present them directly. Unmute yourself, I think that's possible. The option is there. So if people want to be responsive and ask questions to the presenters, please go ahead. Yes, a lot of science. Silence. I think one of the questions we got earlier is a question about the certification level of this product. Well, at the moment we are working with CE MDR processes, but we are at this moment offering CineECG as a beta version. So that makes it easy for us, but that also means that we are really be grateful on your feedback. There's a question here from Mr. Ariman. Do you have any data on sensitivity and specificity? Peter.
Can you clarify that a little bit, Ari? What do you mean with sensitivity, specificity, to say this is normal, this is not normal, or? Because we didn't check it with pathology yet, so.
Actually,
Everybody is able to react by microphone if wished.
Emanuela, you wanted to say something?
it might be interesting to say that, yes, indeed, we had data on sensitivity and specificity in our preliminary study on Brugada patients. And the specificity was quite high because it was about 90%. And I don't have at hand, but it's about 80% sensitivity and 85% specificity.
Yeah,
so was for such a small population, we use in this preliminary, we studied in this preliminary study was a good surprise for us. Of course, we have a much larger study ongoing, so we will have better data in the future. This is for the Brugada, and I have to say that this was where the story started from. So we have more experience with this disease, much less experience we have with the coronary artery disease, and so we have really to improve our understanding.
Okay, there's another question. If I have a normal 12-lead ECG, will it show up as an all green line in the CineECG report?
It can be somewhat, the normal range is between 0 and 100%, and the green is between 5 and 95%. And then if you're in that outer range, then it starts to also be orange. So orange still can mean, it still means it's in the normal range, but you start to get towards the boundary. If it gets red, you're really outside at least the boundaries provided by the PTBXL database. So we need more data to make that more narrow, of course.
I think the basic message is when it's red, it's really outside the normal range.
Yeah.
Okay. There's another question here from Boas.
Yeah, we're doing that at the moment. We're comparing CineECG with intracardiac mapping too. We're in the process of publishing that paper where we compare basically a modeling study with isochrones, with ECG sim methods, let's say, and compare that to the CineECG, and then also compare that to intracardiac mapping. But to really compare isochrones on the heart, you need to have a full mapping of endo and epicardium, and that data is still not available. So, but it's definitely on our radar, and the first paper should be out in I think a month. You will see that on the website.
Okay.
Animal studies. No. Which one do you want to use? And pigs have such a different Purkinje system that you can't compare that to this kind of behavior. The activation within the pig goes basically through the Purkinje system, so you have a much higher speed, which you can adapt on the CineECG, but you can't compare that to humans. So I prefer to stick to humans for this reason. You need the physiology of the human heart and not of an animal.
Okay, I think there's another study we did last year in Utrecht in the Netherlands regarding COVID patients, Peter, and where we had some results on also a proven database.
Yeah, the trouble with COVID is this a patient that had already trouble with its heart, but it was very clear that patients who developed a kind of it's not ischemia, it's more at least T-wave changes, but not resulting from ischemia, and CineECG very clearly showed these wrong direction, not normal directions of the T-wave. So this might also help to identify COVID patients that are getting stressed with their heart without doing anything else than just a standard 12-lead ECG.
Okay. Well, I don't see any more questions at the moment. What we will say is if there are more questions, please use our email address. There's info@cineecg.com, or go to cineecg.com and use the question form, which is also there, and we are more than happy to provide you with answers. Given the time, for now, I would like to thank all of you for your participation in this webinar, and also thank the presenters for their contributions. Most of all, I would really invite those people who are listening and tell your friends and families and colleagues as well, go and test CineECG for yourself and provide us please with feedback as well. For this is, and it will be for us and for you, a continuous journey to further improve non-invasive cardiac diagnostics, and your support is much needed in this. Well, so I'll wrap it up. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.